when I first started doing this podcast, like 100 episodes ago, it was new and stuff like that. We do like a real formal intro and blah blah blah, blah and so forth. And the thing was, we would fuck around for like half an hour
Yeah,
talking before we ever started going, and that's when all the good stuff was. Like we'd all just be hanging out
happens every
talking.
time, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I've gotten now where I'm just like, "Hi, record,"
Yep.
because because that's when the magic is when you get like people getting to go know each other and like hang in and just like,
Yeah.
"Hey, who are you? I've never met you before," and but
Right.
it's you got something,
And
you know.
just checking in, you
So
know what I'm saying? Like I've been looking forward to seeing Jeff. It's already been like what 2 months since we saw each other,
2 months since I
just
saw
like
you out in
that.
Somerville. Yeah,
Yeah, man.
yeah.
So it's good to have more reasons to connect, and then just the conversations that come from that. And then Dart here has, you know, I've known Dart for a really long time, but I mean, out of that time, some of the best parts have been when he's visited Jeff and I's class at UMass, and spoken to the students. It's just been amazing to see
Unbelievable.
just the wealth of information this brother has in his mind about Boston's history, and American history and Black history and sports history and especially music history is just amazing. So I'm glad
I
to
love it.
have this crew together right now.
Let's do it because like Jeff. When I was talking to Jeff about it, he's like, "Can I bring a couple guys on?" I was like, "Absolutely, let's go."
Yeah.
You know. So yeah. Um,
And I'm interested to hear perspectives on this album too. This is interesting.
Can you tell? I was just at a history conference in Kansas City, well known for its rap and hip hop heritage, of course. But I was listening to this like between sessions as I was going back and forth, on like early American Republic stuff like that. I was listening to it in the gym over there. I had this dank, nasty gym. I was on the plane. I was just constantly trying to get ready
Yeah.
to do this out.
Yeah.
So I'm ready.
It
So,
it holds
um,
up. I got to say, I've gone hard for the last week or so when we were talking about it, and I had the record memorized back in '86, and we'll talk more about why that was so. But I just sort of felt like it's really still vibrant, it sounds great still, which is not true of a lot of stuff from the '80s.
Yeah.
There's
how
some
dare
stuff
you,
from the
sir?
'80s that they
I
had
was
those
just
gated
saying that.
drums and yeah, yeah,
I just said the same thing to Tatiana, Jeff. I was just like, I was listening to the new style, and I was like, yo, this is almost 40 years old, and it still thumps. Like if I was to play it super loud right now, it would just sound just as good as anything else that's out there, man.
for real,
It's
for real.
pretty impressive, like the sound quality and the way these guys brought their just their knowledge of musicality and musicianship into what they were doing here with rap. That's one of my favorite parts about it. You hear just some of those like kick drums, especially on that one song there, man. Like it's dope.
Yeah,
There's a lot going
yeah.
on that record.
Yeah, I got so much to go with you guys on this stuff because you were just talking about the music, the personalities on this stuff. Obviously, we'll get into what we're three Jewish guys doing on this album. It's like this album comes out of nowhere. These guys. I mean, I don't know. Let's jump in. You guys want to introduce yourselves before we get into this episode so people know who we're talking about? Jeff, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I should go last in terms of hip hop knowledge, but I'm happy to go
We're going
first.
in reverse order. I'm
Reverse
the
order.
last.
Okay,
I'm
that's
the
fine.
worst,
So,
and then you.
or maybe we're just going in age
All right.
order. So anyway, I'm Jeff Melnick. I'm delighted to be back with Jason after appearing with him on a couple of movie themed podcasts. I teach at UMass Boston. Been one of the great honors of my life in the last 5-6 years to co-teach a class with one of our other guests, Akrobatik. We've taught our big lecture class in hip hop studies for years now. I've written some about the music, particularly about the influence of Jamaican immigration in the first generation of hip hop, and I'm currently working on a book about the Boston music scene from the '70s through the '90s. And obviously, I've talked to both of our guests in depth about that project and gotten lots of guidance from them. So I'll leave it there for now.
Acrobatic, you
I'll
want to go
go.
next?
I'll go.
Go for it.
So I'm Acrobatic. I'm an MC from Boston. Been in the music game for my whole adult life, and as Professor Melnick just mentioned, I've been lecturing with him at UMass Boston for a decade now as well. I'm also artistic director for Self Evident Education, which is a nonprofit organization that makes American history documentaries and live performance productions with a focus on anti-racism.
I'm Dart Adams. I'm an author, historian, journalist, lecturer, fact checker. And basically, my entire focus happened because I was a young kid growing up in the South End, Lower Roxbury, in Boston, immersed in all these different cultures and all these different cross sections of like life, from the elders in the neighborhood who were around for the my neighborhood being a jazz mecca, and what we had the jazz corner, and also the immigration from people coming in, one from the Great Migration, and two coming from the West Indies, the Caribbean, and also our neighborhood bled into Chinatown. So our neighborhood was Boston's first real cultural center slash melting pot. And all those things affected me growing up. And also being born in 1975, I was one of the children, the babies that was around when rap first started being played on local Boston
Mm-hmm.
radio in 1979 into 1980, and I got to see the culture uh, grow firsthand.
Guys, I'm so pumped to talk about this album, talk about rap, talk about all these different stuff. We're talking about License to Ill tonight. Comes out in '86. This is one of the iconic albums, not just in rap, right? Just in music, 20th century. This is shortlist. This album, right? It's not only what it meant in '86, but like what it, like Jeffrey, you were talking before we really got going here. This album still means something, right? This group means something to so many different people. Um, before we get into the Beastie Boys, before we get into this album and what it does, I want to backtrack just a little bit and talk about rap. So for people who are listening in now, and maybe we can do a short history of rap itself and talk about like where does rap come? Like how do we define rap? What is it, and where does it come from?
I'd say one of the things that happened with rap as we know it today is, first of all, we have the lineage of radio disc jockeys, black music radio disc jockeys, who would do like rhythmic talk, and they would like say these little couplets, and it came out also this thing called the dozens back in the day when you would snap on somebody, crack on somebody. The dozens was done in rhyme, in meter form. And when people went on the radio, to introduce the new thing, hey, diddly up, it's the record job. This is the scene with the record machine, and everybody had their different style. So you had Jocko, you had like this guy, you had Jack the Rapper. Everybody had their different style of rhythmic talk, and also like on the street, you got your reputation by rapping, by being able to be a talker. And if you were a pimp, if you were a street person, if you were a politician, if you were a preacher, everybody got their reputation by how they spoke. If you were a leader in civil rights, if you were a gang leader, the people that were at the head of the table, the people that everybody looked up to, were great orators, were people who could sway people with talking. So when we get into the world of like music, the idea is that in this black tradition, you have to be able to talk, and again, you do it in rhyme. So by the time we get past the pig meat Markham and like this whole era, like here come the judge in, I believe, what is it, 1968, and we have all these different records coming along the late 60s and the 70s. By the time we get to hip hop culture emerging from 1973 on, rap the rap or art of rap as we know it emerges between 1976 and 1977 at these park jams, these parties, uh, at different PALs, and between like 1977 and 1978, b-boys and people who were around the DJ who was the focus of hip hop, they started getting on the mic and they rapped. But you were either a DJ who rapped because you had the mic, or you were somebody who came up and you rapped because you rapped over what the DJ did. Like the reason you existed was, for the DJ. So for it to come from 1976 to 1977, this emergence of all these crews of rappers that backed the DJ, to being the focal point from 1979 on with the first rap records that came out, is insane to me.
I'm going to jump in with a piece. First of all,
Go
just for
for
our
it.
listeners down the road, anytime Dart Adams says, wait, what year was it? Dart knows exactly what year it was, so you can write that down and you can put it in the
He
book
knows
because
what
he
day of the
never
week it
gets it wrong.
was. Dart knows
I,
what day.
he
Dart knows
does
what
that.
day of the week it
He
was.
does that little mover. He's like, "Wait, what year? What?"
Yep.
But I just want to say for the record, he always knows
Yo,
exactly
I
when it
co-sign
was.
that.
The piece I want to add in. The piece I want to add in here, just it's hard to even imagine where to sort of jump in after that amazing history Dart gave. Is I do want to throw in the immigration piece because like hip hop, we generally accept was invented in the Bronx. It doesn't get invented without a huge wave of migration from the Caribbean. And that's really just like not to push this too much, but just like in our given moment where like both major presidential candidates are campaigning on anti-immigrant platforms, I just want to say like we don't get hip hop without Jamaicans. Period. There's a huge migration of Jamaicans and other Caribbean people. I know Axe family traces their roots to the Caribbean. Dart's family traces their roots to Honduras. Am I right? Yeah. So those folks mostly came post 1965 because there's a change in immigration law, which basically opens things up in ways that more people can come from Latin America. I won't get into all the details, but more people come from Latin America and the Caribbean than before. Jamaicans bring with them, and Dart was alluding to this. People like Kool Herc, who came here in '65, but really starts making a name for himself in '73. That's the year that Dart was putting a pin in. He's a Jamaican guy who's already schooled in this Jamaican tradition of music making, which is making versions of records where you just sort of go record to record on two turntables, keep the song going, and what in Jamaica they call toasting. You kind of do a rhyme over it. Very simple, rudimentary stuff, but that's what's the early yes, yes, y'all, kind of stuff of the first generation of hip hop. So that's all I wanted to throw in is we don't get it. It's obviously an African American art form at its core, but it
Mhm.
doesn't develop the way it does without Jamaicans and other people from the Caribbean.
Yeah, that's essential to add. I think that what I could add to this is probably uh as the rapper in the group here, um my personal introduction to MCing. Like I'm a few years, I believe, older than Dart, but I kind of got interested in all this stuff probably a little later on. So maybe when I was like 9 or 10, at that time it would have been like just a year or two before this album that we're talking about today came out. I had been this kid who was growing up, and things were much more communal in the 70s, when I was coming up. And so like your parents would like bring you over auntie's house or their friend's house, and everybody's just kind of kicking it, listening to records. All the generations are all there wherever you went. And it would just be like a dance party. And in my earliest memories, it was like Stevie Wonder, maybe some James Brown and the Young Jacksons and all that. And eventually, though, some of the older kids from my family and the other families started playing music independently, and it wasn't their parents playing the music anymore. And now I'm hearing all these breaks that I don't even know where they're coming from. Now I'm hearing beats that no one's singing over. And I'm like, this stuff is sounding, really different, but like really funky at the same time. So my ear was already tuned to it. And then eventually through radio, mostly through again the older kids boom boxes, but also radio at home. When
Yep.
my folks or my grandparents weren't using their radios, they'd let me listen to whatever Kiss 108 or whatever station, and I would hear some of these songs. And eventually, you started hearing some raps. But what really pushed it over the top was vinyl, the vinyl records that especially my mom would always be playing at home. Uh, some of the earliest records, obviously Sugar Hill Gang, obviously Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. So like I'm hearing the message as like I don't know, maybe like a 7-year-old kid, and she loved that record, so she had it on repeat, and I eventually just started hearing this flow, and I'm like, okay. And I'm really young. I'm at the age where if you throw a language at me, I'm going to learn it pretty quick. You know what I mean? Same thing I did with French or whatever. Like I'm no like French, you know, incredible French speaker now, but I know the words. I can read it. I'm literate. But if you try to throw like Chinese at me now, I'd probably have a really hard time learning it. But because rap was introduced to me at such an early age,
Mhm.
I was just already like looking for it. And so the
Mm.
first time one of the older kids handed me a mixtape on cassette, and I got to play that and be able to rewind it and listen to it and take Kumo D's verse and listen to it and rewind it and listen to it again, rewind and listen to it again and memorize it, and then start going to all my friends around the neighborhood and kicking Kumo D's verse for them, like, yo, I can rap. Didn't matter that I could write a song yet. I'm like 9 years old or something like that, 10 years old. And people in my neighborhood started to realize, hey, yo, he's got this down. Whatever this is, this thing, he's got this down. So that made me feel like, yo, I was really one of the first to kind of jump on that. Before, we're not talking about putting records out, but just like loving it and loving it as an art form and embracing it for what it was and understanding the difference between that and the mainstream music. Like I think I figured that out really quickly. And so that origin of like how MCs get introduced to the art itself, I think is really important. And this album is to me one of the most important in that regard for so many different reasons that I'm looking forward to talking about. But I just think that my personal introduction to rap as a rap artist myself is really important because the way people find the art form now has probably evolved in ways that I might not understand, how you can get from A to Z so quickly, you know what I mean, without having a certain innate thing that you experience when you're hearing something for the first time along with everyone else. You know what I mean? And then making something from
Can I ask you, like, I think you brought up a really interesting point here, which is, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it feels to me like the ways in which people were learning rap, the way you're talking about it now, like in the 70s, early 80s, it feels like it's a community thing, right? Because we don't have internet at this point in time.
it.
We
Right,
don't, and this is an art form, a genre that is going to explode at some point in time, but it's not there
right.
yet. You're not hearing it on the radio per se,
At
right?
least
Am
from
I
my
correct?
perspective, at least from my perspective at that young age, it was pretty hard to find. You know what I mean? It wasn't
Right,
like everyone had embraced it yet. There were some big records, a couple of big songs that made it over into the
right.
mainstream, I guess, but it wasn't like, yeah, everybody was looking for the next rap record like it is now.
Yeah, it was a subculture. You had to know somebody or be next to somebody, or you had to be in a certain space to even be close to know
Mm.
what the new rap records were.
Right, right. We in our class, Zach and I often show the movie or parts of the movie Wild Style, which is like a quasi documentary. It comes out in '82, and like just what these guys are, Ak and Dario were saying, like that movie goes to great lengths to show you like the very particular spaces, whether it's a club uptown, a basketball court, a front stoop in a neighborhood. That's where people are making their rhymes, right? It's not happening in the more formal recording studio. Like, I don't think there's a recording studio scene in that movie. Like, that's not where it's happening, right? It's like literally a street music.
And that probably also too, Jeff, speaks a lot to like why, like it's always been this thing to like don't bite my style, you know what I mean? Because we're talking about again this era where there's no checks and balances on that like there is now on social media. Somebody can call you out if you steal somebody's music right away, pretty much, because everybody's kind of in the same room at the same time all the time.
Right,
But
right.
back then, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, if you're from one part of Brooklyn, you go to another part of Brooklyn, and you're like in a rhyme cipher with people, and then you pick up on somebody's cadences and flows. It might take a little longer for somebody to find that out. In fact, some of the rhymes on that first record from the Sugar Hill Gang were straight out of someone else's notebook. And that still gets talked about to this day. So, because it was a street art form, you know, being guarded about what was yours in terms of your style was a very, very important thing. Still is, but back then even more so because you had to actually go to lengths to let people know when someone was biting you. And I think that had a lot to do with a lot of the origins of some of the first battles that were on records anyways.
Guys, we're talking about rap as this predominantly black art form, at least initially, right? Coming up through the Caribbean, folks in cities and things like that. We're gonna get into the ethnicity here of the Beastie Boys, but I'm wondering, prior to these guys, was there an acceptance of non-black artists who were practicing the art form as well, or were these guys kind of shattering a ceiling for non-black rap artists when they hit in
So
'86?
specifically, they one kind of ceiling in particular because there were white
Okay,
rappers before. Um,
okay,
there was a woman who was white who was signed to Tough City. Her name was she made songs Joe Blow and something else, but she won a rap contest in '84, and her name was like
Okay.
Puffy D or something like that. But the thing was, there were white rappers. Like the first white rapper everybody can point to, like, yes, I remember him, was Vanilla B, um, aka Kid Benetton, aka Lord Scotch, who actually inspired MC Search to rap. And one of his name is Blake Lethem. Uh, a lot of people know him. He's Keo, famous graph writer. But he kind of inspired MC Search, who was one of the first like white rap guys who made singles on Warlock Records, Hey Boy, Melissa, Return of the Death, um, and also there was another dude who everybody should know, Pete Nice, who was also a friend of Vanilla B, aka Kid Benetton, aka Lord Scotch. Like he quite literally, that's how Third Base came about. Third Base came about because it was these three white MCs that go back and forth, were in different groups with each other, and then finally one gets locked up, and then two of them get solo deals to Def Jam. So we have about 3, 4, 5 white rappers in existence between 1984 and like 1986, 87. Now, the specific thing that the Beastie Boys did was the Beastie Boys were in a sub category, a subculture of their own, which was punk. And as anybody knows, the downtown scene was basically split between the punk and hip hop groups, all meshing with each other. And this goes back to like 79, 80, 81. This is how the Clash makes Magnificent Seven, because they're this mix of them doing shows with people like uh Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. This is how Blondie ends up working with like the Funky Four plus one more and having them on SNL in 1981. Like everybody on this scene, the downtown scene, knew each other. That's how Rapture happens. So by the time,
Right.
like, and you can look at Blondie, Debbie Harry recording a rap single in 1981 with Rapture, and also listen to the Magnificent Seven from that 1980-81 album by The Clash. There are about 3 rap inspired songs on that Clash album. So
on Sandinista.
Yeah, on Sandinista. So it's not brand new, but the specific barrier that the Beastie Boys were breaking was, one, they were a white rap group coming out of the punk tradition, which switched over into making rap. A lot of it had to do with Rick Rubin, who lived in both worlds too, and also being around that same downtown scene, along with like guys like Dante Ross, and them meeting the guys that ran Def Jam, because it was Rick Rubin before he was even introduced to Russell Simmons. And the funny thing is that Arthur Baker from Boston had Streetwise Records, and he was friends with the Beastie Boys too, and he wanted them for his label, after they made Cookie Puss, which was like their transition out of punk into the world of rap in '83 going into '84. So they started recording the first singles. The Beastie Boys started recording the first singles, with Def Jam. I think it's Rock Hard, then She's on It, which is on the soundtrack for Crush Groove, where it's the first time you see them on screen in like November '85. And you're like, wait a minute, that's what the Beastie Boys look like? Oh, that's why they rapped over rock records, right? But Run DMC rapped over rock records. And so they were like this little family. Run DMC and the Beastie Boys, they were like this family. And it's kind of like why people didn't really diss the Beastie Boys, because they run around with Hollish Crew and Run DMC, and they're down with Def Jam and everything. When you saw a Def Jam logo, you went and bought the record. So the Beastie Boys were kind of like bulletproof in a sense, because their early records, they hadn't caught on yet. The Beastie Boys don't catch on until which is it? 1986, they put out "Hold It Now, Hit It" in spring '86, and "Hold It Now, Hit It," and that's the first song that I remember. Like the Beastie, you couldn't go to a corner, you couldn't go to a part of the neighborhood, you couldn't ride the bus, the T, anything, without hearing a boombox. And this is before people had Walkmans. A boombox blasting "Hold
Yeah,
It
we
Now."
got loud.
God bless.
And then later, we get to Paul Revere, which is months later. So we're going from spring '86 to like fall '86. This is before the album comes out. So the Beastie Boys have these two huge singles. And the thing is that their sound is so infectious that people start making their music to sound like them and producing like that sound that they put across. If you listen to early records by early versions of Run DMC, I mean of and people also did it with Run DMC. But if you listen to early versions of like albums by the early versions of NWA, CIA, which was Ice Cube's group before that, coming out of Stereo Crew, he has a song called "My Posse." My posse, it sounds exactly like a Beastie Boys record. If you listen to early versions of RSO's records when they were on Boot Records, Greatest Show on Earth, like before We're Notorious and everything else, their first three songs pretty much sound like a mix of Run DMC and the Beastie Boys. So that sound really captured everybody's attention. But the ceiling that the Beastie Boys broke, where they were the first white rappers to really make a sound and a statement that really resonated with black rap audience, the core rap audience. And that's what they carry into the release of the album, License to Ill. And that's where they were taken seriously by the rap community and not just the record company.
And I love listening to Dark because he really captures that moment where like the Beastie Boys are this punk, this hardcore group that, whatever, they're doing fine. They're getting some gigs in New York, but like what they mostly are is fans. Like they love music and they go to the Bad Brains shows and they lose their mind. Like Bad Brains, like black fronted hardcore band. And they go to these clubs downtown because that's where they, by their own admission, that's where they feel comfortable. And it's not just magic. Like there's these cultural brokers like Fab Five Freddy, right, who are bringing the music from uptown downtown because they realize that there's some, artistic and commercial reasons to do that. And the Beastie Boys are always really clear. Like they kept going to the same clubs downtown. The music came to them. Like their origin story really is that Darter, you mentioned this group, that the Funky 4+1 came and played at this one club that they always went to. And then, a little bit after that, they started checking out another downtown club, a reggae club called Negril, for the city in Jamaica. And the Treacherous Three came, Kumo D's amazing group, and clearly a model for them. And so it was like, there's these cultural brokers who are also working with Basquiat and visual artists, figuring out how to like make that happen as well. And the Beastie Boys are like, bye hardcore. That was fun. Like this is what's happening. Like this is what's happening, right?
Beastie Boys came through the gamut of the Mud Club, Danceteria, the Grill.
Right.
It was kind of a rap. They were like, nah, this is the future. This is the future for us.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of punk bands too were just like when you listen to Blondie, they were just like, yeah, we're wrapped up in this too. Again, the Clash, we got to get in on this too. Like Celluloid Records,
Tom Tom Club.
Celluloid Records, pretty much just, hey, we're just gonna make records with Phase 2 and Futura, and like before that, they were really punk hardcore records, and then all of a sudden, they have studio musicians playing records for people to rap over.
I want to ask you guys about this album itself. I want to get into the music of this album. There's so much here to go for. Dart, you're just hitting us with a couple of these things right off the bat here. There's a staggered release when this thing's out. We got two that come out before the album drops itself. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the strengths? Let's just kind of we'll go through this album however we want, but like when we think about this album now, God, almost 40 years later. Thank you for reminding me how old we're all getting. But
oh yeah.
I'm feeling it, man. All I see is just
Let's go.
gray in this beard right in front of me, man.
All we do is
Um,
go forward.
um, what's his album doing? What's its strengths, man? When you guys look at this when you look at this track listing and you think back, and we were all listening to it like hardcore the last couple of weeks, but like, where's this album's strengths? What do you like off this album? What resonates?
The wild thing about this album is that Rick Rubin was not only a producer and arranger, he was a musician, he was a DJ, and an engineer all at the same time. And he had a wide variety of musical, a wide musical background. But at the same time, he had these really young kids who had these different sensibilities working with them. Now, in terms of this particular record, this has to be noted. Rap was a single-based genre between 1979 and 1985. The thing that broke everything was another record that came out from Def Jam just before this. What broke everything is LL Cool J's Radio, which came out of the success of Crush Groove, which is Def Jam's creation myth film. And when Radio comes out, it's the first rap record to break into the top 200 high in Billboard from the end of 85 into the beginning of 86. People see the success of this album, and they just got their deal with Columbia. So they see the success of this album, and now major labels are like, we have to sign rappers coming into 1986. And this is what starts the first golden era. So the important thing to remember about this record is that the landscape of rap is vastly different by the time this album drops at the end of 86. Because we already had LL Cool J come through with Radio. We've already had Run DMC touch down with Raising Hell, which was like the meteor that hit. Wait, this album is not just going to go gold and die. It's going to go platinum. It's going to go double platinum. This Run DMC are going to be the guys that the rap group that white kids put on their walls next to their favorite rock groups posters. And the Beastie Boys exploited all of these things that came with LL Cool J crossing over and being on American Bandstand, Run DMC crossing over with Raising Hell and blowing up. And then for the first time, black radio stations were really resistant to rap, were kind of forced to have to play it while the sun was still up at some times. So in 86, we're coming out of the era of The Show and Lottie Dottie, and it's like, oh God, this genre might be around for a while. And we get all these classic singles, which lead to albums, either out of 85 into 86, or 86 into 87. More major labels start signing rap acts in 86. Like Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5 break up into two groups. Grandmaster Flash, who is half the Furious 5, and Grandmaster Melly Mel in the Furious 5, right? So now it's like, wait a minute. There's something happening here. So when the Beastie Boys dropped License to Ill at the end of 1986, it's like there's been a lot of softening. And then I talked about the previous singles, Hold It Now, Hit It, and Paul Revere. Then they re-drop Paul Revere with Paul Revere in the new style, side A and side B. Then they drop License to Ill. So the streets have been fiending for this record. So when it drops. Now, this is important too. Side A and side B. Talking about a cassette, but you're also talking about vinyl. The album opens with Rhyming and Stealing, which is a B-boy anthem, and we hadn't heard it previously. It wasn't one of the singles. So Rhyming and Stealing is like, it sounds like an anthem. Like, it's just loud. You play it in any box. And again, this is still before the era of people having Walkmans. This doesn't happen until the Walkman era really, I say, like, you had to be rich to have a Walkman in 86. But 87, 88, 89 is the height of the Walkman era. That's when we switched from the Walkman to carrying around the boombox. 84, 85, 86 is the end of the boombox era. I have to carry this big radio with batteries on it if it's not plugged into the wall everywhere to hear my shit. But The Beastie Boys kind of usher in that era. You got Rhyming and Stealing, which is like a huge anthem. Then you comes into the new style, the song you know. Then She's Crafty, which is upbeat. Posse in Effect, you know, was kind of short. Slow Ride. Then you get the Girls, which only people let it play because it was short. But sometimes people would fast forward Girls. Now you get to Fight for Your Right at the end of side side B, and you flip it over, and there's no Sleep to Brooklyn. This is what got the crossover appeal because we liked Paul Revere, Hold It Now, Hit It, and Brass Monkey. Brass Monkey took Boston by storm. I went to Timothy in Roxbury, which is on Roxbury. It was on Roxbury Road, right down from Dudley Square. Now it's Nubian Square, and it was the epicenter of Black Boston. And next to it was what we called MPV, Madison Park Village. Whittier Street projects coming out of Roxy Homes. Then you had all these housing developments all next to it. They were around Madison Park, which later became Madison Park, Boston Tech, Madison Park O'Brien High School. Massive high school in a very, dangerous area. And when I would come to the Timothy in the 86, 87 school year, I would walk through there, run through there because there was nothing but gangs. You would hear the Beastie Boys album blaring out of every window of all the surrounding housing developments. And there are about 3 or 4 of them, all close proximity to each other. So you would hear, and then you would hear the cars go by. And this is like Boston, my neighborhood was infested with drug dealers, teenagers who bought cars with cash and had no place to park them. So you're hearing like the new style and Rhyming and Stealing booming out of every car. And also like you might hear like Funky Beat by Houdini. You might hear, a Cameo record coming out of here. So it was like you might hear Janet Jackson's album playing out of somebody's speakers. So it was like part of the soundtrack of the inner city. And the Beastie Boys really found a way, thanks to, Rick Rubin, to make that hard b-boy anthem sound music. Yeah. And that's what really got people. But also it introduced that aesthetic to white kids with, the sleeper things like No Sleep to Brooklyn, or Fight for Your Right to Party.
I want to hear what Ack thinks about this too, but Dart's been hitting on something that might be unpopular for me to say, but like the fact that it came out in an era where we believed in public music, we didn't really have a choice, right? As Dart is explaining in the sort of commercial and technological realities, right? But like a huge amount of the first rap music I heard was cars going by, or people on beaches with big, with boom boxes, and I, was always like that guy who was willing to like go up to someone's blanket and say, what is that you're listening to? Oh, public what? And that's like we as a culture have really turned against that, and I feel like it's like one of the great horrible victories of capitalism is like we're all these individual subjects now, like with our own private music. And these guys, I want to hear from what when Act came to this as well, but like you didn't have a choice, and you sorted in public, you sort of figured out, and it was part of the, Dart was describing that so beautifully. It was like part of the soundscape, right? It was like cars going by, booming systems, music, people yelling down the block, whatever. Like it was just like much more part of the fabric of daily life. So that's all. I just wanted to sort of throw that in as a sociological, yeah.
I think that's 100% true, man. Like just hearing music out loud as part of the environment was definitely a part of daily life in that era. And that had a lot to do with how word got around, It's like we didn't have streaming services, once again, like I don't remember how I managed to get my hands on a Walkman, but I remember listening to excuse me to this album on headphones in school. I was 12 years old when this album dropped, and it kind of blew me away. Not in that, like as Dart was saying, it's not like necessarily that it was like this innovative thing that rock and hard rap were coming together. But I think that they put a different spin on it because for me, like I had been this big Run DMC fan. I loved Run DMC. I loved King of Rock, Raising Hell, all that stuff. But for me, the Beastie Boys sounded better rapping. Even though like the beats were just as hard, the aesthetic was similar because it was b-boy stuff, but their cadences, like I remember one time I almost got kicked out of a car because I said I like the Beastie Boys more than I like Outkast. And the reason is not because I think that the Beastie Boys are better. And I think people get caught up in that like who's better than who. But nah, it's like I'm me and what makes me feel a certain way when I hear it or consume
Right.
it. You know what I'm saying? And so for what the Beastie Boys were doing for me as a 12-year-old kid was I already knew I liked rap and that I liked writing songs because I was already starting to mess around with writing some songs. But now I was like, oh, and you can kind of go the extra mile with your concepts. And if you get with your buddies, you can kind of go back and forth and really vibe off of each other. So they were a big part of why at that time of my life I was like, yo, rap groups are the shit. I want to be in a rap group. I don't want it to be about me. I want to be part of a team. That was why I was at that school. I went to this prep school, Roxbury Latin, in West Roxbury. Man, I remember, one of the reasons, the main reason I wanted to go there was so I could be on a team. I could play on a basketball team, a football team, baseball team, be with some fellas and go out and kick some butt, right? And so, like, the rap group kind of provided that. And so, like,
And
that kind of did that for me with, like, Perceptionist. I was like, I finally had it. But before that, I was in a group called the Soul Squad, and it was like four of us. And it was like we were all, it was like, leaders of the new school, Beastie Boys, Salt and Pepper, all these groups, just crews of people that like the solo artist was more of a special thing back then. And there were more groups. So I love the Beastie Boys for all those reasons. And the fact that they had excuse me, PMCs, but still were writing songs that had topics. Now I admit some of the stuff they were saying, I cringe when I listen back to it now. Sure.
so did they. Yeah.
So do they, of course. But I do think though what they were doing songwriting wise was definitely taking it to another level. And the way that they were delivering their music showed that they were so connected to the funk aspect of it. It never occurred to me for 1 second that these were some white dudes trying to rap.
Yeah. See,
These to me were MCs that were just as fun to listen to as any other MCs that were out. And the ad libs in between and the way they jump in and doubled up on each other's rhymes, you could tell that the performance was going to be solid and that this was something that they were really curating and it wasn't just happening by accident. So I was like, this is art, in the same way that I would appreciate how Public Enemy was art in a different way than just your average generic rap or a rap group. So that's what they were to me.
and I think the big thing too was that when you listen to the album, why it stands the test of time is again the sequencing, right? It opens with rhyming and stealing, then goes to the new style, then it gives you She's Crafty, Posse in Effect. It gives you Girls to Fight for You right at the end of side A, open side B with No Sleep to Brooklyn, and gets to Paul Revere holding out Hit It Brass Monkey, but it closes with Slow and Low and then Time to Get Ill. That's how the album closes. Like that is
Yeah,
plus sequencing. And the
yeah.
crazy part too is that Slow and Low. I think about Slow and Low, right? The first time I heard any piece of Slow and Low again was when we were watching what's the name of the movie Crush Group. Uh, when Run dares Sheila E to rap on the Gong Show. I won't get gone. We'll run DMC, not Cheech and Chong. Know what I'm saying? Let's hear you rap. And then when I hear Slow and Low, I'm like, wait a minute.
Right. We're the Beastie Boys, not Cheech and Chong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you realize, wait a
Mhm.
minute, that's a Run DMC song. We don't hear Run DMC's version of Slow and Low until after the fact. And then, Rick Rubin kind of says that what happened was they were on tour so much and they were around each other so much that they decided we're going to cover Slow and Low, which is interesting because Run DMC never released Slow and Low. So when they heard their version, they were like, just run with it. You can have it,
Yeah.
which is insane that they covered a song by their boys and their boys were like, nah,
Right.
y'all can have that. It's
Good.
your song, you know? And
What's your favorite song on the album, Dart?
Oh man. I have to say overall, it's probably because of impact, it's probably the new style because of impact. But in terms of core memory version of core memory, it's gonna have to be Brass Monkey because again, that was the song that I couldn't go through Roxbury without hearing everywhere.
Mm.
But in terms of the new style is kind of the song that hit like a megaton bomb on the Eastern Seaboard because that's the song that kind of got Philly, you know, New York, Massachusetts, Boston, Connecticut on the wave of the Beastie Boys because She's On It didn't do it. Rock On didn't do it. I kind of forgot that Rock On existed and She's On It was in Crush Groove for such a short time that when we got the Crush Groove soundtrack, we kind of skipped it because everybody was trying to get to radio. Because people had the Crush Groove soundtrack either for radio or they wanted the radio album, you know? So it was this crazy thing with the Beastie Boys were the singular entity, and that album separated them from everybody else. And it goes from the thing that the B-Boys have to a crossover phenomenon.
It's that great. I mean, Jason, I think Jason's been kind of like hinting at this question of like, how'd they get away with it? And you guys have been like giving
Yeah.
such great answers already. And I love there's like the kind of institutional way they got inoculated, like, because they were tied in with the Def Jam guys, they were running with Run DMC. But then also, like, when I hear Dart talking about the sequencing of the records, I'm like, those guys literally, like, they were not treating rap as a joke, far from it. Like, they were deep in it, right? But their very first song, like their kind of battle cry song, they're pirates, right? Like, they're literally saying, like, we steal shit. Like, that's like and it's like, you can't, no one can accuse you of stealing shit if you say, I steal shit, right? Like, that's like they just put it right out there right away. And they've got that chant, and the crowd chants along with them, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, right? And it's if you watch the live videos
I mean,
from that
yeah.
era, like, the crowd's losing their mind because it's like they're all
I
getting to
lost
like.
my mind in a room by myself on that part of that
I
song.
love
We
it.
all did.
Flipping, like ready to flip the table. You know what I'm saying? Like there's certain parts of certain songs that can do that for me. That at the
Right,
right
right,
time will get me amped for anything. Absolutely.
Well, the
right,
Polar
right.
story, right, is the same thing. But like when I think about how Philly reacted to them, Philly gives us, you know, the idea of like the evolution of gangster rap from Schoolie D. Schoolie D loved this album, you know. Schoolie D loved this album, and Philly loved this album. Like if you talk to Amir Questlove about this record, they talk about they thought the Beastie Boys were Puerto Rican, you know, like
Hmm.
he tells a story that he brought the record to one of his teachers, and the teacher flips over the record. It's like Horowitz. There's a I think we should just play you. He's like, no, they're Puerto Rican. I saw them on Soul Train. He's like, you saw them on Soul Train and you thought they were Puerto Rican. Like, are you
Right.
sure? Because again, this is another thing too. We didn't see rappers' faces a lot. We
Mm.
got
Right.
labels. We got these mimeograph posters that were black and white. We could barely see faces. So we didn't really know what rappers looked like. I promise you guys, the very first time I ever saw Eric B. and Rakim, a picture of Eric B. and Rakim was in a issue of Black Beat. My brother took an X-Acto knife, cut it out of the Black Beat, and taped it to the wall. And for the first month, I would look at that picture and I'm listening to Eric B. and Rakim. I thought Eric B. was Rakim and Rakim was Eric B. That voice,
I got something like that on my wall right now.
that voice can't come out that little man. It wasn't until my brother's friend Trent came over. He's like, little man, who do you think Rakim is? I'm like, him. He's like, no, that's Rakim. And my mind was blown. We didn't know what rappers looked like. You know how long it was before we knew Madonna was white? We thought Madonna was a Puerto Rican girl because she was doing freestyle. A white girl sing freestyle? So to give you an idea,
Mm.
like how we just attached the artist to the music and their output. When I finally saw the Beastie Boys and put it together again, when I saw the Beastie Boys when I saw the Beastie Boys in Crush Groove, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until later did the MTV No Sleep Till Brooklyn, thing happens where I'm like, oh, you start to see the effects of them being white, having them, have this type of explosion that other rap groups didn't really benefit from the
Right.
same way. Like,
Right.
they get to open from Madonna, you know, they get to be on MTV all the time. And it was funny because they used to subvert the system by, if we're going on MTV, we're bringing Hollis Crew with us. We're bringing Hurricane with us. We're bringing Ronnie Ray with us. We're bringing LL Cool J with us. We're bringing this group with us. So, and like they kind of make fun of it in the movie, the terrible movie, uh, uh, Tougher Than Leather. When they all go out to dinner and the guy remarks, "My God, the white guys were worse than the black guys." So there was a subversion that
Mm.
Beastie Boys did. They took an album that was b-boy anthems, minimalistic, hard, bare, hard drums, samples, loops, like real hip hop shit, and it crossed over to white America to the point where you're watching Who's the Boss, and Alyssa Milano is getting the people on Who's the Boss to play Beastie Boys records, during those episodes because she's such a fan. It kind of turned everything on its head.
Can I ask you guys something about the visuals of this? Because the thing we haven't talked about yet is MTV. And MTV famously hesitant to showcase black artists in the 1980s, right? I seem to remember Beastie Boys being everywhere, and I'm wondering if their whiteness kind of forced MTV to start showing rap. Like, I wonder, is there a dynamic here that I'm thinking about here? Like, do you recall like the MTV thing here?
Yes. Okay. So
Let me just say something real quick because I'm going to be real quick with that.
Good.
I would just say that most of my memory of the Beastie Boys in their early days in this era that we're talking about being on MTV, I almost vividly remember that it was mostly "Fight for Your Right to Party," which I don't consider a rap song. I just think it was another
Right, that's
rap
a
song
rock
on the
song.
playlist.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
rock song on the playlist, yeah.
Okay.
But like their other records, I don't really remember them being like dominant on the video shows and stuff like that more than any other rap stuff. But you would see them on the screen all the time with that one song for sure.
Okay.
Same way you go to the Celtics game now, they play that song while they're shooting T-shirts out of cannons. Some songs just get that big.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So I'll say,
And yeah, go ahead, Dart. I'm sorry.
I'll say that this is going to be funny. I think the Beastie Boys benefited from something else that people completely forget about. And one of the reasons why Def Jam was able to get above so many other reputable record labels in the rap space that were independent. You had Tommy Boy, right? You had Profile. You had all these other rap groups. I mean, you had Tough City. You had all these independent record labels. You had Jive, which thing with RCA. They had nice, great rosters, artists that were making hits. But why did Def Jam jump to the head of the line and be right there for MTV? And a lot of it has to do with a man named Bill Adler. Bill Adler was a genius when it came to shaming people, promoting things, and getting to the front of the line. So Bill Adler is the reason why Run DMC's Rock Box and King of Rock, were among the first rap videos to be played on MTV, and actually the first black artists to really get played on MTV, if you want to keep it a buck, was probably Musical Youth and then Prince. Musical Youth passed the Dutchie and then Prince, like 1999, his early single videos, because he had the idea, I'm going to shoot videos. So like before that, there were not a lot of black acts on MTV, and they just didn't make the space because they didn't think anybody cared. And then David Bowie, pulled their skirt up. So when we get to Def Jam, the reason why we get to see the Beastie Boys is because Bill Adler was actively like, we need to get the Beastie Boys on MTV. He also had the same idea with LL Cool J. I'm Bad was on MTV early, so that was a lot of Bill Adler, but also the Beastie Boys were tailor-made for the rebellion of what MTV embodied. Because Act Right, you would pretty much see just No Sleep Till Brooklyn, which had people who worked for MTV in the video. Also, they were friends with people that worked at MTV. But like No Sleep Till Brooklyn was also, a popular, video for similar reasons, the Rock angle. But also, they did a bunch of promos for MTV, even when their videos didn't get played. So you saw them all the time. And did their whiteness, affect that their appeal? Absolutely. They were the Eminem effect before Eminem. But this is a classic album. It's not like a Vanilla Ice situation where Ice
Right, right, right.
crosses over. You know,
Yeah, no, like
Exactly that part. Yeah.
it's a classic. Two things are true at the same time, right? Like they definitely benefit from their whiteness. They also happen to be immersed in the culture and really amazing music makers and visual, content creator. And I'll just put a point on it because I know these two guys are too polite to say it, but like they're not just white, they're Jewish, right? And like
Yeah.
they're entering a business that in this era is still very much an era where there's a lot of Jewish folks who are in promotion, who are in the record companies. I'm not like saying this in a conspiracy theory kind of way, just that like folks kind of recognized each other. And the Beastie Boys, they got out to LA and they knew how to talk to the guys at Capitol, right? They had gone to like fancy exam school in New York, whatever. Like they were just in this kind of like Jewish milieu where they knew how to like get business
But
done. Like
you know what's cool about that though, Jeff, is that like those guys never shied away from their Jewishness. Like they said their government names on their
yeah.
records. I know their names: Adam Yauch, Adam Horovitz. You know what I'm saying? Like those are Jewish
right.
names,
Mike
and
Tyson.
they're on those rap records. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So they were never like, nah, that's not what we are. That's not who we are. We're adjacent to it. But no, they were like, yeah, this is who we are.
Yeah.
And because of that, it
Yeah.
was like
Yeah. That's
how naturally all of their slang flowed and just their swag. To me, they had more swagger than most rappers did at the
right.
time. They just
Right.
sounded naturally cool. Like these are the guys you want to hear rapping because they just got so much energy and they're always on time, and it just
Yeah. Yeah.
feels like it's rehearsed to like ad nauseum, but at the same time the aesthetic of the music is so wild and free form. And that's really what I loved about them, and it hit so hard. So like just from a purely musical standpoint, I think that they were way ahead of their time with that.
Oh, absolutely. And
Way
lyrically,
ahead.
they were. I mean, I love thinking back, and they've gone on about this in interviews since then. That like they created this like vision that they were telling autobiography, like you rap artists always do, but you're really characters, right? And like they were these characters who were having this like amazing life that like almost was like mythological, right? Like they're Alibaba, they're Paul Revere, like it's like
Yeah.
they turn what like I was trying to track how many times they mentioned White Castle on the record,
Right,
and
right.
like I'm a vegetarian, I don't fuck with White Castle, but like I know what it is, right? Like
No doubt.
you know, and
Yeah.
they make it sound like I'm picturing some kid, in the hinterlands listening to this record, being like, I gotta go to White Castle, and like then you picture what White Castle really is, those horrible little square burgers, right? But they're like creating this mythology of their lives that's like they're making it sound like the
The
most
Wild West
amazing.
thing with Paul Revere to me was just always so brilliant. Like that, because it was like you're listening to a hip hop record, but they're taking you to another universe. They're letting you know, like, yo, hip hop doesn't have to just be about what your feet are planted in. It can be about anything. It can be about the future. It can be about the past. It can be about your optimistic worldview, a nihilistic worldview, whatever you want it to be. And so when on the same album, like you said, these guys are swashbucklers on one song, they're Wild West Cowboys on another song, they're wild Playboy F boys on another song. And yo, I think one of the biggest travesties is that they didn't make a movie with just the
Mm,
Beastie Boys, like a movie like Porky's, but starring the Beastie Boys.
They
Like they
tried.
could have killed that
They
genre,
tried.
man. They did.
Yeah, they tried. It's one of the reasons why they.
What happened?
It's one of the reasons why they left Def Jam and they were trying to get over to Capitol, and that deal died. Because one, the idea was proposed to them by Rick Rubin, and they didn't want to do it. But then later, when they actually did want to do stuff, that's how Hey Ladies and all these other things happened. And that's how they naturally got into making their own short films and doing things like
Yeah.
Sabotage. Because
Right.
when the idea was brought to them, it was kind of, we have to do this because the Fat Boys made Disorderlies. Or we have to do this because the Fat Boys made Disorderlies and Run DMC made Tougher Than Leather. And they were like, we don't want, we're tired. You have us touring
Yeah.
all the time. Like, we don't even know who we are anymore. It's like the joke from that movie, The Goods. Uh, they had been selling and going from town to town. He's like, I haven't been home in a year, and I think I left my door open. You know, so it was like that situation with the Beastie Boys. So the movie never happened, but it like they started making films and directing later when they took over the identity, the ownership of their own, identity.
Yeah.
Like and you're right, they didn't shy from being Jewish. Like they do interviews, like, hey, tell them what your grandpa always says at the dinner table. When you at Thanksgiving, save me the tuchus.
Ah, amazing, amazing.
Like it's funny because the idea of like when you had a white artist, they had to somehow play up how cool and down they were. And I think that kind of shifted on his head with the introduction of like Third Base. Third Base were like the first wave of this is a white rap group with dudes that grew up in the culture that are MCs and B-boys, but at the same time, we're serious. That was their angle. That was their version of like the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys joke around and they're gonna wear the medallion from the Volkswagen Beetle and they're gonna be naked on stage with the girls. No, we're serious. So that was kind of where the shift happened,
Right.
Third Base, and that's why Third Base also opened the album with the song, Sons of Third Base, dissing the Beastie Boys who had just left Def Jam for Capitol. So that was like 89, 90, So the trait, and again, I talked about it. So many groups use this album and use their aesthetic to create their own sound. We don't have Cypress Hill. The established Cypress Hill is we have the nasal voice with Be Real, and then we have the high voice with Sin Dog, and the way they rap and the things they rap about without them being fans of Beastie Boys coming up. And that's why they did the So What You Want Soul Assassins remix. Like, it's crazy. Then you listen to guys like Schoolie D. Schoolie D doesn't become, the Parkside, the PSK, what does it mean, all these things, and then what he becomes afterwards without the influence of the Beastie Boys and hearing them. They're kind of like going across the nation. And Ice-T.
It's kind of, yeah. I mean, when I hear you say it, it's like so remarkable because like I'm sitting here trying to think of like, and I'm scrolling back my mind because like obviously there's this bad old tradition in American popular culture of white artists either directly getting in blackface in the 19th century or in early 20th century film stage, very often Jewish, like Al Jolson, first Sound movie, the jazz singer who plays up his Jewishness in them, and like you get to this moment in the 80s where like it's kind of a remarkable trick they pull off, which is like nobody accuses them of, to use the language of our current moment, nobody accuses them of cultural appropriation, or nobody that I've encountered anyway, right? Nobody says it was audio blackface. Nobody said, right? Like, I mean, I'm listening to Act talk about them as if they were like, sort of like respected elders, like, and that, like, that's remarkable. Like that.
They did have one beef. A writer, Brian Chin from Billboard, did not like them. And he was kind of the lone guy out there who was kind of like, I don't like the Beastie Boys. I prefer these other rap groups. But it was odd because the Beastie Boys are blowing up at the time he's doing this, and everybody else is loving him. And like, he's like, I don't like the Beastie Boys. These other rap groups are better. But at the same time, when you open up Billboard, they're at the top of every chart, and every other article is about them. So it was very interesting, that era. But like I could say like Brian Chin was possibly like one of the few people. Well, I think the later thing that when they really did get the trackers later was when they went on tour. The Together Forever tour and the tours they did afterwards, because LL Cool J would complain about them because they would get citations for drunkenness on stage, being lewd, and LL Cool J was like, "You're blowing up the spot for me." and Public Enemy and everybody else. He's like, I just wish that they like, got their act together and start screwing it up for us. But at the same time, he's their boy. It's famous. The famous story is that you don't discover LL Cool J without one of the Beastie Boys. I think it's on Mike D
Yeah.
going into the demos and finding LL Cool J's tape, playing it, loving it, and then bringing it to Rick Rubin and then Russell Simmons.
Guys, we're now sitting. You guys said earlier we're 38 years removed from this film, from this album coming out. Almost said movie. We go back and listen to it. How is this album aged? Can you still listen to it like to this day? Do you find yourself listening to different parts of it now than you said than maybe when you were a younger man in 1986? Are there different things that you listen to? How is this? We go back and listen.
For me,
what is this album?
For me, I think about this album because I think about the specifically, we're coming up on in a couple of weeks, it's going to be the 35th anniversary again of Third Base's debut album, the Cactus album. And that album came out right after the Beastie Boys' comeback album, Pole's Boutique, which I didn't hear because I hated Hey Ladies. And I was just like, I don't care for them. And I was into Third Base. So when Third Base's album comes out and I hear Sons of Third Base and all this other stuff, I'm like, this is what I wish the Beastie Boys were more like, So that's one of my all-time favorite albums, that. But when I go back and listen to this album, because I didn't hear Pole's Boutique for probably like maybe 9 months to a year after it came out, because one of my friends got it from Columbia House, and I listened to it because I was so into Third Base and all this other stuff that came out, like X-Clan, just like the X-Clan era. But when I come back and listen to this album, I think about the sequencing. I think about how hard some of these songs are. Think about how they bounce off each other. And this album, I have a real appreciation for it. A lot of it has to do with the sound of it, how it sounds in cars, how it sounds in stereo systems, the sequencing, I keep saying, because it was a genius idea. If you're going to have a song like Girls, you have to have it at the end of side A. If you're going to have No Sleep to Brooklyn, you have to have it at the beginning, after you flip the tape or the record over, and then you have to end the album a certain way, because when you flip it back over, you're going to come back. You go from Brass Monkey, Slow and Low, Time to Get Ill, flip it back over to Rhyme and Skill in the new style. And then you even things out with She's Crafty. So when I listen to this, I'm like, this album just laid the blueprint for everybody else. Because again, 86 is the first year that rap goes from being a single based genre to an LP based genre. This is the beginning of the golden era. So this album is actually one of the grails, one of the ways, hey, if you're going to make an album, if you're going to come over to this format, if you're going to make a piece of art that's going to have a lasting life, and this is what you do with it. So it aged really well for me. Like, I don't like Girls now. I mean, I like Girls. I don't like the song Girls now. I could kind of do without like Fight for Your Right. Right. I could do without that song, but I let it play because I have an appreciation for what it did, and also know that it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of the years of Run DMC making Rock Box and King of Rock, and then Walk This Way, which resurrected Aerosmith's career. So they kind of needed this song, and they put it at the end of side A. So it aged really well to me. Although there are albums I do like better. Again, I will take Third Base's The Cactus album over this any day. But this album aged really well.
For me, I think I'm probably acutely aware of how lyrics age as much as anything.
Sure.
So when I was listening to this album most recently earlier today, it depends who's around, because context is everything. Mm-hmm. So if I'm by myself and I'm just in my lab, working or exercising or something, I'll play it as loud as I want and enjoy every moment of it, because I know the entirety of the context when it dropped. You know, maybe not to the detail that Dart remembers. I was there though. You know what I'm saying? I remember what was going on around me. I remember who was around me. You know, I was going to all boys private school, and in my headphones I was listening to this. And when this was over,
Mm.
I'd pop in Salt and Pepper, and I just go back and forth between Hot, Cool, and Vicious, and License to Ill. And that was literally teaching me how to rap. You know what I'm saying? And so, and then the third one was Bigger and Deffer. So those three albums in that year were the three that I had on rotation. And, you know, the thing about the Beastie Boys to me is just that, like, there was no point in time where they ever felt out of place. You know, like their music just felt in right where it was supposed to be in hip hop. And when I listen to it now, the only songs, again, I'm kind of like in the same place where Dart is, where like all the hip hop b-boy MC shit to me still holds up. It sounds great. As a matter of fact, like this album to me is great, like to a point where like if I play it from beginning to end, I pretty much have every single sonic moment memorized of the whole entire
Mhm.
album from beginning to end. You know what I mean? Maybe miss a word here or there, but that's about it. But like I know where all the drops are, all the jam, jam, jam. I could do the cuts, like mimic them. It's a sing along album from beginning
Mm.
to end. Like rhyming
Mm.
and stealing, I literally want to have a big mug going, yo ho ho. You know what I'm saying? Like I want to do the whole thing. So that's what music is supposed to do for you. You know,
Yeah.
something can be hot and sound really good when you play it loud in some speakers or whatever. But what is it that's going to make you pick it up 35 years later and be like, yo, they did something here that still matters to me now in my life, even though I'm a completely different person than I was
Mm.
when it came out?
Mm.
And so, like, this record does that for me. No Sleep Till Brooklyn is a song where that became like a personal anthem for me when I was on tour the first time with Definitive Jux. It was like me, Lif, Aesop Rock, and Murs, and Kamuta, a couple other groups. And No Sleep Till Brooklyn was like the tour song. It's like a tour bus jam. You know, like it's really No Sleep Till, and you just replace Brooklyn with whatever the next city was on the tour, and you really started to understand like this is what their life is. And then we're out there now as MCs kind of making it. We're like, yo, we're doing this shit. You know what I'm saying? We're in, Jacksonville today. We're gonna be in Miami tomorrow, whatever. You know, like that's a long drive, but you know what I mean. And and
Yes.
and so they captured the aesthetic of what it was to be like in hip hop at that time, and their music was definitely not like I, I would say not for girls. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of like moments on there where I think like you play that music and a lot of girls like much like with like a Public Enemy record, and women might be like I could take this or leave it. But just on like some purely hip hop shit, I think B girls love it. I think like it's the type of music that will get you on the floor. Like the new style, the breaks that are in the new style, it's like that's made. Like I hear that and I'm just expecting the floor lords to just pop up out of nowhere. You know what I mean? So they created memorable sonic moments on the album, and that I think is what sets in hip hop especially, that's what's gonna set all rap albums apart from one another. Are what are the memorable moments? It's the reason we love the De La Soul albums because we love the parts in between the songs just as much as the songs themselves. And with the Beastie Boys, I think it's the moments that they create within the songs, even just their little subtle interactions with each other while they're rapping their verses are just memorable. And like sometimes when I'm listening to one of the songs, instead of rapping along with the verse, I'm doing the ad libs that King Ad Rock is in the background doing for every other line or whatever, or just jumping in at the parts where they all jump in. And it's fun to listen to and it gives it like crazy replay value. That's why you can still listen to it all these years later because
Mm.
I guarantee you the next time I listen to that album, I'm going to hear something that it feels like I just heard that for the first time, even though I might have known it was
I
there.
mean, the wild thing too
Yes.
is that you think about all the people that were influenced by this particular album. The New Style is the name of the group that later became Naughty by Nature. Their group name was The New Style. They named the album Independent Leaders because they had to do something different. You have Tretch's voice and then you have Vinny's voice, going back and forth off of each other, right? I think about A Tribe Called Quest, who kind of put their whole album, the concept of the album around, going through these different stages and verses and playing off of each other, Fife's voice and Q-Tip's voice, which was a lot of it came from, listening to the three Beastie Boys, ping pong off of each other. That's why they became friends later on. De La Soul loved the Beastie Boys. That's why they collaborated together later. And like they ran into each other later in life. And like the first thing that they did when they see each other, like, yo, I have to tell you something. Like you unlocked core memories for me. Like the reason why I'm on this tour right now, the reason why I'm a recording artist right now is because of y'all. Do you understand that? And it's wild to think that these guys who were just probably just kids doing whatever, you fast forward
Yeah.
10, 15, 20, 25 years, and you realize through all Beastie Boys evolutions as well, because they grew up a lot. But they're running into artists that were heavily influenced by them. The reason I got into this music is because your singles and your album. This album was a touchstone for a lot of people. And it's wild too, because people talk about Paul's Boutique, how it was a classic and everything, but I never lie. I'm like, I was so late to Paul's Boutique. I was so late to Paul's Boutique. You know, what I didn't even realize like what it did for sampling and all sort of stuff, because I'd already heard, you know, albums that done similar things like 3 Feet High and Rising and like the Cactus album, but none of those albums could be made today. But when you listen to this album, this is one of the grails. This is one of the most important. This is one of the most seminal rap album. It just, like I already said, it laid forth the foundation for what you had to do to make a classic rap album entering the golden era, the first golden era, 86 going into 89. We don't get
And,
there
yeah.
without here.
I just want to make one other pitch for it from when my first year of listening to it, which was 86, 87. And I was, I'm a little older than these guys. I was teaching high school. It was my first year out of college. I was teaching high school in Brooklyn, at a private school that was basically for kids that had been kicked out of every Catholic school in Brooklyn. So it was mostly Italian American kids. And I became aware of the record because I noticed that in class, like a lot of boys who normally weren't taking notes or anything were like writing like mad in their notebooks. And like finally, I walked over to one, and what they were writing was the lyrics to Paul Revere. And they were, because they were like memorizing writing the way you do, right? And so I, of course, because I was like the hip young teacher, I asked them like, what are these Beastie Boys? You know, like, and they turned me on to it, and I got the record, and I remember just being just immediately knocked out. And I didn't know they had been punk rock guys before, but like in retrospect, there was like that punk energy to it that I was really familiar with. So anyway, like I got into the record that year, and the thing that really put a punctuation mark on it for me was like sometime in like the spring of '87, I went to see Elvis Costello do a show somewhere back at my old college, upstate New York, and he made fun of them. And he went on about, can you imagine these Beastie Boys? You know, I can't do the British accent, but like, and they're singing about fighting for your right to party, and like, I remember in that moment, like having this real clarity that like I didn't love that song, I never have, but like I was like, I'm on their team, I'm not on his team. You know what I mean? Like, and they're bringing this kind of like they're or not bringing, they're accessing this kind of like vulgarity and energy, this kind of like anti-authoritarian comedy that's just like so central to the kind of popular music I love and love then, continue to love now. And I was just like, I don't want to listen to pompous fucking British Elvis Costello telling me
Yeah.
that this is stupid. Like, I'm like, yeah, it's stupid. STOOPID, stupid, you know, like, yeah,
Can
sorry.
I just jump in there too and say something else about that song, even though it's obviously not the best song on the album? The one thing I thought was really cool about it and why it does make you feel like, yo, I'm on these guys' team, because that song, they're talking to you.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
just saying we do this, we do
Yeah.
that, we do that. They're like, man, you're at home. It's such a drag. You know what I'm saying? Your mom threw away your stash. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on at the house, man? Come on, let's do something about this. We're gonna fight for our right to party. You know what I mean? People need to stop putting their foot down on us. They're saying, hey,
Right.
I'm on your team. Why wouldn't you be on my team? You know what I mean? I'm not on your parents' team telling you not to go out past 8 o'clock or whatever it was. You know, they're being rebellious, and it's being accepted. So, you know, even though maybe the aesthetic of the beat of that song or whatever wasn't the move, they still, it didn't matter because they cast such a wide net. It's like you're not gonna have to wait more than 3 minutes before you're loving what you're hearing again on that
Yeah,
album.
and
That's right.
You know, so they experimented with a lot of stuff, but I think that it's fine, especially with their background. it didn't seem like it was out of left field. And as someone who did hear their music, their punk stuff before they transitioned fully into hip hop, I heard that stuff, so I knew that they were musicians and that they might play the guitar and the drums on their songs and stuff like that. That had me more interested about what they were going to
Right.
do. And then when I finally started to, I never got to see them live in person, but I finally saw some videos of them performing overseas, and it's just amazing. Like all three of them are like when in their songs, their verses, it's like it's not Mike D's verse. It's just verse one of the song and verse two of the song. It's not MCA's verse. You know, it's like they're all on every verse. And then in their show, they're all backing each other up. They're all taking turns on the turntables, doing a turntablism set together, all three of them showing that they have those skills. Then they stop and break the set down for a while and get on the guitar and the bass and the drums and just jam out for 20 minutes. Then they come back and do the new style. You know what I mean? So like it's music, and to me, like License to Ill is one chamber of what the Beastie Boys are capable of. And I'm glad that before we lost MCA, that they were able to show like what I think is at least close to their full range of what they were able to do as musicians, so that they never got pigeonholed into what
That's
they
right.
showed with
That's right.
License to Ill. There's no
Absolutely.
one album that captures the entirety of
And
that.
to cap off something that Jeff said, which bugged me out that happened with Elvis Costello, is one, I think the biggest cosign of the song I didn't love, "Fight for Your Right to Party," is that Public Enemy flipped it on one of the greatest rap albums of all
Yep.
time. It Takes a Nation Million to Hold Us Back, and made it "Party for Your Right to Fight," and sampled them.
Mm-hmm.
But also, to
Yeah.
the point about Elvis Costello and the Beastie Boys, this is nuts. But am I correct that Elvis Costello decided to override something that he was supposed to do on SNL, and he performed a song that they didn't want him to perform on SNL, and they got him banned from SNL? So here's what's crazy. Do you know how we got back on SNL to perform? The Beastie Boys were going to do a song, and they start playing the song, and Elvis Costello comes off stage, and he jumps on. He's like, "Hey, wait. I have to do this." So they switch around, and they start playing the song that got him banned from SNL. The Beastie Boys.
Oh, for real? I'm gonna look that up.
Jeez.
Wow.
Oh
So for
wow.
you to say that, I was just like, wait a minute, that happened? Because I
Wow.
swear that Elvis Costello got back on SNL with the Beastie Boys being his backup band.
I'm gonna look for that. That's amazing, Dart. That's
Insane.
fantastic.
Insane.
I
Guys,
mean, yeah.
we've been talking about this album for like an hour and a half now. We're
Mhm.
going through it. You guys are all tied to this album. What do you think about this now? What's our final thoughts here on this album? People coming in and listening to this thing. I know people are going to want to go back and listen now. What are your final thoughts here on License to Ill and the Beastie Boys in general?
If I can I start? If I can jump in first on this, just because I've been dying to get it. That's the question I've been dying to get at most, which is just like
Get it?
the thing about the Beastie Boys is and Dart said this already, but I just want to underline it. They grew up in public. Like they kept being artists in public for decades, and they offered their own critiques of the record. Like in a way, we don't even have to say anything because they did it all. Like they talked about, Ack was underlining this before. Like they talked about the sexism and the homophobia, right? I'm not going to say it, but the original, the original title of the record had a slur, a homophobic slur in it, and they talked about what they meant by that, whatever. But like then they just really, I mean, Adam Horvitz ended up married to one of the leaders of the Riot Girl movement. Like he ended up like developing a level of consciousness about gender issues, about sexism that I think is so far
He
beyond the
grew up.
average. He grew up and engaged in what in radical circles we used to refer to as self-critique. Like you always have a session at the end where you say, what are we doing well, what are we doing poorly, what do we got to work on next? And like they just did that. Like Ack was just saying, like that became sort of like their live show was like, here's our evolution, here's who we are now, here's all the places we've been, right? And I can't listen to Paul Revere now just because of the line about the wiffle ball bat, like that. I don't think like that's not a line any of us is going to enjoy in this moment, right? And like they talk, like I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but like I kept listening to them, literally their records, but also what they were saying about their records, right? Because they were able to, like, they had the I don't know what to call it, like just the consciousness, the courage to sort of say, like, here's the good shit, and here's the shit we would never do now, right? And I just can't think of that many artists who have undergone that kind of public evolution over that many years, and been willing to talk shit about their own early stuff. And I mean, that to me is just like an incredible gift. And so, like, for me, the record now is like, I've got my memories of being a 22-year-old terrible high school teacher. Nobody has ever been a worse high school teacher than I was, I promise. But I had that record, and it really gave me a lot of energy that year and gave me a lot of I gave me some insights to my students who were very much growing up in that milieu, And so anyway, I just sort of like, I just have a lot of gratitude to them. Like, I can't think of a better word. Like, I just feel really like I've gotten a lot from them. And I've learned a lot, and obviously had those moments like Ak was talking about of just pure pleasure, with the stereo turned up to 10. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, everything Jeff just said and more. Because first of all, love this album. I've talked about this album to death. To me, it's about the evolution of the Beastie Boys as artists, as people, as creatives, as activists. You go
Mm-hmm.
from the guys that say that line on Paul Revere to Bodhisattva's Vow, to being active with the Miller Repa Fund, to being the kind of guys who stop a concert if they see dudes doing certain things to a woman in the crowd, making sure she's okay. Like, that is a total 180 from the mindset that they had back when they started out catering to, frat boys and also the B-boys simultaneously, because they had them both in the crowd at their shows. Like, they were very happy to, you have this audience next to this audience, and we only saw that at first, in the downtown clubs, Mud Club, Cafeteria, Danceteria, Negril, all these other different spots that were the downtown movement, all these different galleries, the Fun Gallery, all these other different places. So they fostered that community, but also they did it in their music. They were like, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to make it so that women are going to want to come out to our shows. We're going to make it so that generations, dads and
Mm-hmm.
sons, moms and daughters are all going to want to come to our show together 20 years later. And they evolved. So you listen to their music, like, it wasn't a thing where it's like they fell off. I was still fucking with the Beastie Boys. And again, I was late to Paul's Boutique, but I was right there for Check Your Head. I was there for Ill Communication. I was there for the album with Intergalactic on it. Hello Nasty. I was there for BS 2000. I was working in a record store trying to find that. It was like a holy grail. Everybody looking for the vinyl of BS 2000. I remember, like, when the Sounds of Science, when they put out that magazine. Is it XL, X large, or Grand Royal?
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. X
X
large.
large,
Yeah.
and then they had Ground Royal. So we were listening to Biss records. I didn't know who Biss was, but I was listening to him because if they picked them for Grand Royal, I want to hear who the Beastie Boys like. All those compilations, the Inner Sound, all these different things that the Beastie Boys got into later. Like, they showed that we can grow up, we can have different ideas of what we do, we can go out to these different spaces, become directors, make our own videos, pick up instruments, and like, we have no problem making Sabotage on the same album. We do a song with Q-Tip, we have no problem doing records with Cypress Hill, and then going off and collaborating with, like, La Tigra. So that's what I take away from the Beastie Boys. They grew up, they evolved, and they didn't try to hide it. We're parents.
Mm-hmm.
I have gray hair. I still play pickup basketball. I can't do certain things because I gotta be there for my kids. I don't like saying the lyrics that I wrote in this record back in 1987 because I have a family now, and I look out in the crowd and I don't want to be that person. Like, that guy couldn't be in my life. And how they handled, the passing of, Yuck, right? I mean, the passing of MC.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So,
yeah, you got it.
Yeah, so they entered the pantheon of my favorite rap crews, like A Tribe Called Quest, like De La Soul, who have lost members. who have this long legacy, who evolved throughout the times, who has music that has changed throughout the times, and it's the soundtrack to our lives, but they still stand as these bellwethers of this is how you can change and grow as an artist and as a person. And I think that's what the Beastie Boys occupy for me. So like I'll have them up there with Run. I have them up there like Run DMC will never be together again. You know, but the Beastie Boys can't be together again. It's different. You know, Public Enemy's still around. You know, all those guys are still around. But we can't have De La Soul or Tribe Called Quest who were just inducted to the Hall of Fame. You know, but Fife's no longer with us. You know, so but I think of all these groups that evolved and grew over time as they became adults and as they became grown people with families and responsibilities. And I look at them like that's how you do it. They didn't hide anything from anybody. They didn't hide their gray hair. They didn't hide their new station in life. They incorporated it to their music and their art and their output.
Yeah, man. I mean, as far as License to Ill specifically, I just I just think it's, a seminal rap album definitely is the phrase that works there. It's one of the most important rap albums to me. Um, I think that it is a great snapshot of the time and what it was like in America, specifically New York City at that time. Just with especially the sound aesthetic, but all of the slang, the use of the breaks and the samples and the loops and the DJ cuts and everything that hip hop claims to be sonically is on this album. It's all there. The 808s, everything is there. So for that matter, I love it. As far as like the parts of it that we might consider cringy or that we know wouldn't play in certain circles now, I'll say two things. One, the music that comes out now under the flag of hip hop is much more vulgar and terrible in most cases that I hear all the time. So at that time, yeah, I suppose it was kind of coming from a normalized time in society, whereas now it's not normal in society anymore, which is great. But for some reason in the music, it's just like it's just the lay of the land, and so I think there's a desensitization that has gone on. But what I will say is this, and this is a stance that I developed later on, I think in my own career, which is like we we see all of these movie directors, screenwriters, people who write television shows, and comedians. They get to live out and play out their sickest, darkest fantasies and create the most disgusting characters in their shows that murder and rape and do all these things. Music is just another form of art. So, to your point, Jeff, where I understand what you're saying about Paul Revere, but at the same time, when I'm listening to that, and maybe it's because I'm an artist, I just hear a guy who's writing a story rhyme and kind of wrote himself into a corner and just needed a line that rhymed right there, and then he said that, and on top of that, the scenery of the song is a completely fantasy world, Wild West, and you're this bandolero, you're just this guy out on your own, a rebel out there in the desert. I think you have fair play to use your poetic license and say whatever the hell you want in that story. What would Stephen King have happened to that guy? And why is it okay for Stephen King to write that in his book and all that detail and all that gore and all the housewives love it?
Yeah.
Right? So I give the Beastie Boys a pass, man. Say whatever you want. I grew up listening to the Ghetto Boys. I think the Beastie Boys are rugged. Listen to what the Ghetto Boys are saying, and they're the ones who said it. You don't want your kids hearing songs of this nature, but you take them to the movies to watch Schwarzenegger. So to me, Beastie Boys A+ album. I could have done without the song Girls also. You know what I mean? But at the same time, every once in a while I hear it and I like it because
You
it
know,
comes up at the right
Ak,
time.
I mean, I've heard you do this in class, Ak, and I really appreciate the reminder that like it's hard not to get confused between the kind of autobiographical nature of so much hip hop, and that like these are characters, you know. And it's funny because
Yeah,
Girls is the one that I don't have a problem with because it's like so obviously this like nerdy Jewish
yeah,
guy who's
this
talking like
is
he doesn't have any girls. Like this is like
right.
right, like it's so like in that song, like to me, I laugh through it every time because it's like try to get a first date first, you know, before you start talking about like how she's going to clean up your room and all the rest of it. So I really appreciate that. And I think that's really important for people listening like that. Like hip hop artists are artists and they are creating personas. Your mother did not give you the name Akrobatik at birth, right? Like,
Exactly, exactly. And when Everlast said, I'll serve your ass like John McEnroe. If your girl steps up, I'm smacking the hoe. I did not think that Everlast was ever gonna pop up in the news having smacked a woman. I never thought that once. I just think that he said a line that in a song in a community where everything is kind of fair play, and now we've moved to a time where we realize, hey, we need to be a little more sensitive because there are some real world implications and there are people that are being violent against women and it needs to stop. Okay, so maybe there's a time where joking about that is not cool anymore. That's why they stopped letting Jackie Gleason say "pow" right in the kisser to his wife on the honeymooners, right? So we
right,
learn,
right.
we evolve together, we grow together, but that doesn't mean that you have to say necessarily, I'm just gonna completely disavow everything that I did when I was a young person who didn't know everything that I know now yet. You can still embrace that stuff. You've seen me, Jeff, when I do shows and I say something that I don't really feel like I need to say anymore. I just kind of bleep it out as I go along. You know what I mean? But I don't have to throw the song away because
Right.
people know when I made it and who I was when I made it, and so that speaks to what Dart was saying about their evolution, the Beastie
Yeah.
Boys, because they and what I was saying earlier about how thank God that they did get the opportunity to stick around for decades after this album so that they could show where they were going to take it because, as much as I do love License to Ill, I do think that the next album that they made is one of the greatest rap albums of all time, bar none. But that's a
Oh,
topic for another podcast.
that's
License to
another
Ill.
pod, Acrobatic. That's
License to
another
Ill
pod. I love it, guys. I can't tell you how much fun this has been to sit down and
no
talk to the
doubt.
three of you guys about this album, about the music, about the artistry, about its relevance today. Dude, guys, this is so much fun. So thank you,
Thanks for having
all
us,
three of you
man.
guys, for being here. This was
Anytime,
amazing.
brother.
Thank you. Thanks, Dart,
Love it.
Knack.
And
That was
if they ever
amazing.
do a Last Dragon Part 2, you got to have me and Dart at least back. I don't know if Jeff knows about Part 1, but you got to have us back.
It's on.
All right, that's all I need
Thank
to
you,
know.
Jason.